My name's Anthony, I'm 13, and I'm about to tell you the story of how I ran away from home because I thought my mother had killed my father. What should I have thought when my mother and father crossed the world together, and then my mother returned, looking pretty good, with my father's remains? But let me tell you the story from the start. My father always liked adventure, and was constantly in search of some action. He loved alpine skiing, he's been paragliding, and done all the things that are associated with risk and adrenaline. My mother, on the contrary, was very down to earth. She was constantly forbidding my father to do all the exciting things that he enjoyed so much, and I could never understand why. I have to admit that my father didn't really pay attention to my mother's restrictions, and went on doing whatever he wanted. We all lived together, my father, my mother, and my 2 young sisters, and I was always very close to my father. I loved his active lifestyle, full of adrenaline and excitement, but it seemed to me that she, my mother, simply hated him for having such an insatiable appetite for life. So, I wasn't really surprised when I started to hear the word divorce more and more often. But that also meant talking about the house, which in fact belonged to my father. My mother would often say that she didn't want to see him anymore and that she wished that he would leave. But it seemed that he wasn't just going to leave the house that he grew up in, and where his son and 2 daughters were growing up too. From what I saw, he was trying to save their marriage, at least for the sake of the children. You may think that children don't understand what's really going on between their parents, but I did, and I understood that my father insisted that they take things to a family psychologist and see if he could get them to save the good things between them, if they were still there. So it wasn't surprising that one day my father told me that he and Mum were going on vacation together, and that he was inviting his sister Helen to look after us during the 2 weeks they were going to be spending on the other side of the earth. I was so happy for them. I thought this would probably solve all of their problems, and that my mother would get to take a break from her housekeeping routine. And, who knows, maybe during this vacation she would change her mind and start taking pleasure in this active way of life that my father enjoyed so much, and that they would come back happier than they were. But in reality, everything turned out the other way around. Mother indeed came back, but she came back alone. She didn't answer any questions. She only repeated that there was an accident, and sometimes she'd say, "I warned him." And she seemed strangely calm and kept to herself, making all the necessary preparations for the funeral. 'Cause something happened over there, and my father returned home in an urn. My mother managed to fix all the formalities and bring his ashes along with her. That was the end of their story, and their problems that they wanted to solve. And it almost seemed to me that my mother looked relieved. I was stricken with grief, and was sitting in the corner under the stairs rocking back and forth, trying to come to grips with the fact my father was gone forever. And my mother planned a party. She was going to invite as many people as she could, and it was really very strange. If they both knew so many people, from her work, from my father's work, from the neighbourhood, why didn't she invite them over when my father was with us? He loved to throw a big party, but he would always get very noisy and loud, and would suggest doing something, as my mother would put it, stupid. Whether it was diving into our pool, or potato sack racing, or just playing soccer on my mother's beloved lawn. All of that would be frowned upon, and later on, after the guests left, he would be reminded of his unacceptable behaviour. So why was she doing it all now? And why was she counting the knives and forks, the cups in the cupboard, and the sheets in the closet? She was so calm, just going through the motions, doing the things she used to do all her life. Cleaning, laundering, gardening. Did it matter that all she was interested in was this house, and the things in it? And what exactly did she warn him about? That if he didn't leave her this house, she would kill him? And the more I watched my mother on the day of the funeral, the more I thought I was right in my suspicions. She was only occupied with the things that had nothing to do with the memory of my father, mostly with the house. Again, now I had no doubts. My mother had somehow killed my father because of this stupid house. I wasn't going to go to the police or do anything that could harm her, but I simply didn't want to see her or this house anymore. So right after the funeral, I took the train and went to stay with my father's sister, my aunt, who was staying with us while my mother was carrying out her malicious plans. So when Aunt Helen, together with her husband, came home from the funeral the next day, they had a surprise. Me, sleeping on the open terrace of their house. When they woke me up, I told them about my suspicions, and that I didn't want to live with this woman anymore. Well, they told me the truth. My father had a heart disease that could kill him at any moment. And though my mother loved my father very much, she was trying to prevent him from doing everything he enjoyed, just because all this was forbidden for him. He should have lived a quiet life, where lawn mowing would be the maximum physical activity that his weak heart could endure. But he refused, and he said he would rather not live at all than live such a boring life. And he didn't want us, his children, to know that he was ill. So he forbade my mother and other relatives to even mention it. No wonder we took my mother's worrying for eternal discontent. And I suppose threatening him and saying that he would have to leave his house and never see his children was the last argument she had. It was a paragliding accident during their vacation that had finally killed him. They also said that sometimes when people lose somebody dear to them, they experience such deep grief that they begin to only concentrate on the simple things that can keep them going. I realized at that moment how blind I was, but there was nothing I could have done except to go back. After all, I was the only man in the family now, and I had to try and help look after my sisters and my mother.